Free my dad. I know how to make your sugar normal again. The entire courtroom froze. Judge Richard Hayes had just sentenced Daniel Carter to 20 years in prison when an 18-year-old girl suddenly stood up from the back of the courtroom. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted those shocking words. Everyone thought she had lost her mind. The judge frowned. "Young lady, one more interruption and you'll be removed." She took a deep breath and looked straight into his eyes. "I know something your doctors don't. Give me 10 minutes, and if I'm wrong, I'll leave without another word." The courtroom erupted with whispers. Then, before anyone could react, the judge's face turned pale. His hands began to shake. Sweat rolled down his forehead, and he grabbed the edge of the bench to keep from collapsing. The bailiff rushed forward. "Your Honor." The girl didn't move. Instead, she quietly said, "His blood sugar is crashing. If you wait for the ambulance, it may be too late." For the first time that morning, the judge looked at the girl, not with anger, but with fear. The courtroom fell into complete silence. Judge Hayes struggled to breathe as his vision blurred. The bailiff reached for the emergency phone, while the court clerk called for medical assistance. The 18-year-old girl stepped forward carefully. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. "Please don't waste another minute. Ask him one question." The judge nodded weakly. Emily asked softly, "Your Honor, did you take your diabetes medicine this morning but skip breakfast because of today's busy schedule?" The judge's eyes widened. "Yes." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Emily turned to the bailiff. "Do you have orange juice, regular soda, or glucose tablets in the courthouse first aid kit? Please check now." The bailiff ran out of the courtroom. A minute later, he returned with a small bottle of orange juice from the staff lounge. Emily handed it to the judge. "Please drink it slowly." Within a few minutes, the judge's shaking began to ease. Color slowly returned to his face as the courtroom doctor arrived and checked his blood sugar. "She was right," the doctor said. His blood sugar had dropped dangerously low. Acting quickly prevented this from becoming much worse. The judge stared at Emily in disbelief. "You just saved my life." Emily lowered her eyes. "I didn't do it to earn your sympathy, Your Honor. I did it because my father taught me that saving a life always comes before seeking justice." Judge Hayes remained silent for several moments. The courtroom doctor finished the examination and looked at him seriously. "Your Honor, this isn't the first time your blood sugar has dropped this low, is it?" The judge sighed. "No, it's been happening more often over the last year." The doctor nodded. "You've been managing emergencies, not the root of the problem." Emily looked at the judge with calm confidence. "My father spent 25 years helping people with diabetes as a nutrition coach. He always said that controlling blood sugar isn't just about medicine, it's also about understanding daily habits." The prosecutor immediately stood. "Your Honor, this has nothing to do with today's trial." Judge Hayes raised a hand. "Sit down." The courtroom fell quiet again. He turned back to Emily. "You interrupted my court to save my life. Now tell me, why should I believe your father is innocent?" Emily took a deep breath. "My father never stole that money. He uncovered who really did, and that's why someone framed him." She slowly removed a worn notebook from her backpack. "My father wrote everything down." Judge Hayes looked at the notebook. "What is it?" Emily met his eyes. "The evidence that can prove you just sentenced an innocent man." Emily walked slowly toward the judge's bench, holding the old notebook tightly. "This notebook never left my father's hands until the day he was arrested," she said. The prosecutor smirked. A handwritten notebook isn't evidence. It's a story. Emily didn't argue. Instead, she opened the first page. Inside were dates, bank transfers, names, and meeting notes recorded over several years. Every entry was organized with remarkable detail. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Where did your father get this information?" "He was the financial manager of the charity that reported the missing money," Emily replied. "He discovered someone had been moving small amounts from different accounts every month so no one would notice." The courtroom became silent. Emily turned another page. "My father planned to report everything to investigators on Monday." She paused. "But he was arrested on Sunday night." The judge's expression hardened. "Who had access to these records besides your father?" Emily looked toward the prosecution table. There was one other person. She slowly raised her hand and pointed across the courtroom. The man sitting beside the prosecutor. Every head in the courtroom turned at once. The prosecutor's assistant suddenly went pale. The courtroom exploded with whispers. The prosecutor immediately stood up. "Objection. This is outrageous. She's making accusations without proof." Judge Hayes didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Emily. "You pointed at Mr. Collins, the prosecution's financial assistant. Why?" Emily opened another page of the notebook. "My father never accused anyone without evidence." She held up a photocopy of a ledger. Every unauthorized transfer was approved using Mr. Collins' employee ID. The transactions were always made late at night, just minutes before the system's daily backup. Mr. Collins' face lost all color. "That's impossible," he muttered. Emily continued calmly. "My father also wrote that someone else knew the password. He believed the employee ID was being used to frame the wrong person." The judge narrowed his eyes. "So you're saying the records point to Mr. Collins' account, but your father believed someone else was behind it?" "Yes, Your Honor." For the first time, Mr. Collins looked frightened instead of angry. Then, a court security officer hurried into the courtroom carrying a sealed envelope. "Your Honor, this was delivered anonymously just a few minutes ago." The judge opened it. Inside was a single flash drive, and a handwritten note. "Watch this before the verdict becomes permanent." The courtroom became so quiet that no one dared to speak. Judge Hayes held up the flash drive. "Can this be viewed immediately?" The court technician nodded and connected it to the courtroom display. A security camera recording appeared on the large screen. The video showed the charity office late at night. Daniel Carter, Emily's father, walked into the records room carrying a folder. He looked around, placed the folder on a desk, and left a few minutes later. Nothing unusual. The prosecutor smiled. "You see, Your Honor. This proves nothing." The technician continued the video. 10 minutes after Daniel left, another person entered wearing a hoodie and gloves. The figure sat at Daniel's computer, logged into the system, copied several files onto a USB drive, and changed financial records. Before leaving, the person deliberately placed Daniel's office ID card on the keyboard. The courtroom gasped. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Can we identify the person?" The technician zoomed in. The face was hidden. But one detail stood out. The intruder had a large, distinctive phoenix tattoo on the left wrist. Emily whispered. "My father wrote about that tattoo." Across the courtroom, Mr. Collins instinctively pulled down the sleeve of his left arm. Judge Hayes noticed. "So, what exactly are you hiding, Mr. Collins?" Mr. Collins froze. For a brief second, no one moved. Then Judge Hayes spoke in a firm voice. "Mr. Collins, Roll up your left sleeve. I don't understand why, Collins stammered. That's not a request, the judge replied. It's an order. Slowly, Collins rolled up his sleeve. The courtroom leaned forward. There it was. A large phoenix tattoo, identical to the one seen in the security footage. Gasps echoed through the room. The prosecutor looked stunned. I had no idea. Collins quickly shook his head. This proves nothing. Thousands of people have phoenix tattoos. Emily stepped forward. My father knew that. That's why he didn't rely on the tattoo alone. She opened the notebook to its final pages. My father wrote that the thief always wore an expensive silver watch with a cracked blue face. He noticed it during a late-night audit. Everyone looked at Collins' wrist. The same silver watch was there. The cracked blue dial matched the notebook's description. Judge Hayes' expression turned cold. He looked at the lead investigator. I want Mr. Collins taken into custody for questioning immediately. And I am vacating today's verdict until this new evidence is fully investigated. As officers moved toward Collins, he suddenly shouted. You don't understand. Then he pointed toward the courtroom doors. I wasn't the mastermind, he's already here. Every person in the courtroom turned toward the entrance. The heavy wooden doors slowly opened. An elderly man in an expensive gray suit walked inside, flanked by two lawyers. His face was calm, but the moment he saw the flash drive on the judge's bench, his confidence disappeared. Emily whispered. Victor Lang. Judge Hayes frowned. You know this man? Emily nodded. He was the chairman of the charity board. My father trusted him more than anyone. Victor smiled politely. Your Honor, I'm only here because I heard there was an unexpected delay in the verdict. Judge Hayes looked at him carefully. Interesting. The verdict was suspended only a few minutes ago. How did you know before the official notice was released? Victor hesitated. The courtroom noticed. Emily opened the notebook again. My father wrote one sentence about Mr. Lang. She read it aloud. If anything happens to me, don't look at the employee who follows orders, look at the man who gives them. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Judge Hayes turned to the investigators. Seal every financial record connected to the charity. No one leaves this courthouse until we know the truth. Victor's smile vanished. For the first time. He looked genuinely afraid. Two investigators walked toward Victor Lang. Sir, we'd like you to remain in the courtroom. Victor forced a smile. Of course. I have nothing to hide. Emily shook her head. My father said you'd say exactly that. She reached into her backpack one last time and pulled out a sealed envelope. My father told me, only open this if I end up in prison. Judge Hayes nodded. Open it. Inside was a signed letter and a small key. The letter read. If you're reading this, the people I trusted have betrayed me. The key opens locker 214 at Union Station. Everything you need is inside. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Hayes immediately turned to the lead investigator. Send a team to Union Station. Retrieve whatever is in locker 214. Record every step and maintain the chain of custody. Less than an hour later, the investigators returned. They carried a locked metal box. The key fit perfectly. Inside were original financial records, backup hard drives, and a signed confession from the charity's former accountant. The confession stated that Victor Lang had ordered the money to be stolen and forced employees to frame Daniel Carter. Judge Hayes slowly closed the file. He looked at Daniel, then at Emily. The truth has finally found its way into this courtroom. Judge Hayes carefully reviewed every document from the metal box. The courtroom waited in complete silence. The former accountant's confession matched the financial records, email printouts, and backup files. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Daniel Carter had been framed. Victor Lang's confident smile disappeared. "This is fabricated," he shouted. "Anyone could have written that confession." Before anyone could respond, the lead investigator stepped forward. "Your Honor, we just received confirmation from the forensic lab." He handed a report to the judge. The fingerprints on the documents matched the former accountant's official employment records. The digital files also show they were created years before Mr. Carter was arrested. Judge Hayes nodded slowly. "That makes these records highly credible." Victor suddenly stood up. "I want my lawyer." "You'll have one," the judge replied calmly. "But first, you'll answer for the evidence against you." Emily looked toward her father. For the first time in months, Daniel lifted his head. Tears filled his eyes as he whispered, "I told everyone I was innocent." Emily smiled through her own tears. "I never stopped believing you, Dad." The courtroom watched in silence as years of lies began to crumble before the truth. Judge Hayes placed the case file on the bench and looked across the courtroom. "Based on the newly discovered evidence, this court cannot allow the previous verdict to stand." He struck the gavel once. "The conviction of Daniel Carter is hereby vacated pending final review. He is to be released from custody immediately." For a moment, no one moved. Then the courtroom erupted. Emily burst into tears as the handcuffs were removed from her father's wrists. Daniel wrapped his daughter in a tight embrace. "I thought I'd never hold you again," he whispered. "You promised you'd come home," Emily replied. "I just had to make everyone see the truth." Even the court officers lowered their eyes, moved by the reunion. Judge Hayes watched quietly. Then he spoke. "Mr. Carter, this court owes you more than freedom. It owes you justice." Just then, the lead investigator received another phone call. His expression changed instantly. He looked at the judge. "Your Honor, we've just arrested the former accountant. He has agreed to testify. And he says Victor Lang wasn't working alone." The courtroom fell silent once again. Victor Lang looked toward the doors as officers escorted the former accountant inside. His hands were shaking. Judge Hayes spoke firmly. "You've chosen to testify voluntarily?" The accountant nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." He took a deep breath before speaking. Daniel Carter never stole a single dollar. Every eye in the courtroom was fixed on him. It was Victor Lang who created the plan. He ordered me to alter the financial records and promised me a promotion if I stayed quiet. Victor slammed his hand on the table. "He's lying." The accountant pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket. "I knew one day he'd betray me too." He handed it to the investigator. The recording was played through the courtroom speakers. Victor's voice was unmistakable. "Blame Daniel. He's honest enough that no one will suspect we're using him as the fall guy." A wave of shock swept across the courtroom. Judge Hayes looked directly at Victor. "Do you still claim you're innocent?" Victor lowered his head. For the first time since entering the courtroom, he had no answer. Victor Lang sat motionless, staring at the floor. The courtroom waited for him to speak. Finally, he let out a long breath. "It's over." Gasps filled the room. Judge Hayes leaned forward. "Are you confessing to organizing the theft and framing Daniel Carter?" Victor slowly nodded. "Yes." He looked toward Daniel. I chose you because everyone trusted you. I believed no one would ever question the evidence if it pointed to the most honest man in the company. Emily tightened her grip on her father's hand. Years of pain had been caused by a single greedy decision. Victor continued. The money wasn't spent on charity. It was hidden through shell companies and fake contracts. The lead investigator immediately turned to his team. Freeze every account connected to Victor Lang and recover the stolen funds. Judge Hayes struck the gavel. Victor Lang, you are under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and framing an innocent man. As officers placed handcuffs on Victor, he looked back at Emily. I never thought a daughter would destroy everything I built. Emily answered without anger. You didn't lose because of me. You lost because the truth never stays buried forever. The courtroom erupted in applause. The applause slowly faded as Judge Hayes stood from the bench. I've spent over 30 years delivering justice, he said quietly. But today, I nearly became part of a terrible injustice. He looked directly at Daniel Carter. Mr. Carter, this court apologizes for the pain you and your daughter have endured. Daniel shook his head. Your Honor, the people who lied are responsible. I'm just grateful the truth finally won. Judge Hayes nodded with respect. He then turned to Emily. When you stood up today, you weren't thinking about revenge. You were trying to save a stranger's life. Emily smiled softly. My father always taught me that real justice begins with compassion. The judge remained silent for a moment. Your courage reminded this court why fairness matters. He signed the final order clearing Daniel Carter of every charge. The clerk announced. All criminal charges against Daniel Carter are dismissed. Tears filled the courtroom. As Daniel and Emily prepared to leave together, reporters rushed outside the courthouse. News of the dramatic trial had already spread across the country. But neither father nor daughter cared about the cameras. After months of fear and heartbreak, they were finally going home together. As Daniel and Emily stepped outside the courthouse, hundreds of reporters surrounded them. Camera flashes lit up the street. Daniel. How does it feel to be a free man? Emily. How did you know your father was innocent? Daniel raised his hand, asking for silence. I don't want revenge, he said calmly. I want the truth to help others who have been falsely accused. The crowd grew quiet. A reporter turned to Judge Hayes, who had just walked out of the courthouse. Your Honor, after everything that happened today, what's the biggest lesson you've learned? The judge looked at Emily before answering. Justice isn't only about following the law. It's also about having the courage to admit when new evidence changes everything. The crowd applauded. Then the judge surprised everyone. Emily, would you and your father join me for a community event next month? I want people to hear your story. Emily smiled. We'd be honored. As they shook hands, no one noticed Victor Lang being led to a prison transport van. He looked back at the courthouse one last time. Realizing he had lost not just his fortune, but the lies that had protected him for years. 1 month later, the courthouse auditorium was filled to capacity. Judges, lawyers, police officers, students, and families had gathered to hear the story that had captured the nation's attention. Judge Hayes walked onto the stage first. A year earlier, he would have spoken only about the law. Today, he spoke about humility. I've learned that a courtroom should never stop searching for the truth, he said. Justice is strongest when we are willing to correct our mistakes. The audience applauded. Then he invited Daniel and Emily onto the stage. Daniel looked at the crowd. I spent months behind bars for a crime I didn't commit. Anger could have consumed me. He paused. But my daughter reminded me that hope is stronger than hatred. Emily stepped to the microphone. I didn't come here to be called a hero. I only refused to give up on my father. The room fell silent. Many people wiped away tears. In the front row sat several families whose loved ones were still fighting wrongful convictions. For the first time in years, they believed justice might still be possible. After the event ended, dozens of families gathered around Daniel and Emily. One elderly woman held back tears. My son has been in prison for 6 years, she said. Everyone tells me to give up. Emily gently held her hand. Don't stop searching for the truth. One piece of evidence can change everything. Judge Hayes overheard the conversation. He turned to the state's chief prosecutor. We need a better system for reviewing convictions when credible new evidence appears. Within weeks, a special review panel was created to re-examine cases involving possible wrongful convictions. Several old investigations were reopened. Some innocent people were finally given another chance to prove the truth. Watching the news from home, Daniel smiled. Our fight wasn't only about us anymore. Emily nodded. If our story gives even one innocent family hope, then every difficult day was worth it. Outside, the evening sun lit up the sky. For the first time in a long while, the future looked brighter than the past. 6 months later, Daniel Carter had rebuilt his life. He returned to helping local charities improve their financial systems, determined to protect honest organizations from fraud. Emily had started studying law. People often asked why she chose that path. She always gave the same answer. Because I know what it feels like when the truth has no one to defend it. Judge Hayes kept in touch with them. His doctors were pleased that his diabetes was now well managed through proper medical care, healthy eating, regular exercise, and carefully following his treatment plan. At a public ceremony, the judge smiled at Emily. You didn't cure my illness, he said. But you helped me realize I needed to take my health seriously before it was too late. Emily smiled back. And you reminded me that justice is strongest when people are willing to listen. The audience stood and applauded. What had begun as a desperate cry of, "Free my dad," had become a story of courage, truth, and second chances, changing many lives along the way. 1 year later, the courthouse looked very different. On the main wall hung a new plaque that read, "Justice begins with truth, compassion, and the courage to correct mistakes." Judge Hayes paused in front of it every morning before entering his courtroom. Daniel Carter had become a respected speaker, sharing his experience with judges, investigators, and law students across the country. Emily was now one of the top students in her law school. Her dream had never changed. One day, she wanted to stand in a courtroom, not as a frightened daughter, but as the attorney who defended innocent people. One afternoon, Judge Hayes invited Daniel and Emily back to the same courtroom where everything had changed. He smiled warmly. A year ago, this room witnessed fear, lies, and betrayal. He looked at Emily. Today, it stands as proof that one courageous voice can change the course of justice. Daniel placed his arm around his daughter. You saved more than my freedom. You gave our family its life back. The courtroom filled with applause once again, as everyone stood to honor the courage that had turned a desperate plea into a lasting legacy. As the courtroom emptied, Judge Hayes remained alone for a moment, looking at the bench where the case had begun. One desperate cry had changed everything. A father had regained his freedom. A daughter had proven that courage could overcome fear. A criminal empire had fallen. And a courtroom that nearly made a tragic mistake had become a symbol of justice. Judge Hayes quietly switched off the courtroom lights and smiled. The law gives us authority, he whispered. But the truth gives us justice. Outside, Daniel and Emily walked down the courthouse steps together under the golden evening sun. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. After everything they had endured, simply walking home side by side was the happiest ending they could have imagined. Sometimes, one brave voice is all it takes to change a life, and sometimes, it changes the world. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes that truth and justice are always worth fighting for.